Hello, and welcome to this special industry roundtable on sustainable workflows. The construction industry is working wonders, doing brilliantly to push on the net zero agenda. But we want to look at how off-highway equipment manufacturers and powertrain solution providers, what they're doing to help the construction industry push forward on the net zero agenda. Joining me today, I've got Jeremy Harsin from Cummins.
Morning.
And Mike Gomes from Topcon.
Hello.
First of all, I've got a number of questions. And the first one I really want to look at is how we can set and maintain sustainable standards and make sure that you adhere to by primary, secondary, and tertiary suppliers.
So with respect to suppliers, once you begin to get engaged into the process of sustainability, one of the first and most important things is looking at your scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions, and then beginning to get engaged with your supply chain. And so that starts with understanding both where you are as well as where you want to go, and beginning to get engaged into that process and begin to get some basic metrics, right? And the most important thing is just, for the most part, starting the dialogue, because it will take at least 6 to 12 months to engage to your supply chain and help to get them up to speed. And here at Topcon, we're just beginning that process.
In terms of starting the dialogue, how do you go about doing that?
Most often it might start with something like a sustainable survey, right? So the elements of understanding where everybody is on that scale, because everybody's in a different point for the sustainability journey. And so it would start off with maybe a benchmarking survey of understanding where you are, and then understanding what are the most material issues that you're headed towards. And so what are the most important aspects that you'd like to be looking at? In certain places, it might be human rights. In other places, it might be materials and sourcing. In other places, it may be things like treatment of people, or even the extended supply chain and how they're interfacing with their suppliers, or elements of water or environmental risk for the different locations.
Jeremy, how do you see this from a Cummins perspective?
Yeah, for Cummins, we produce engines and powertrains, so a lot of the responses you're going to get from me are going to be kind of angled toward that. So we're very much focused on system out emissions from the equipment and how our products are used in the field. One of the things we've been pretty consistent on, I would say messaging-wise, is when you ask about how do you get sustainable standards, I think the key is that the standards that come in are practical and realistic to implement, and really more widely applicable. We tend to see pocketed things which are really hard to navigate. Not to say that we sit still, but we want to make sure that we've got the right things to work on in the right time frames. I think in some of these past discussions, we've talked about scale, in particular, like how hard that is to build on an off-highway, in an off-highway world where the volumes are not on highway. But for us, being able to build scale on solutions and being able to manage those, that's a problem not just for us, but also for the OEM partners as they think about chassis proliferation and those kind of things. I think a big part of it comes down to you got to have good collaboration between the regulators, suppliers like ourselves, the rest of the industry, trade associations. I think through those conversations, you tend to pick up a lot more of the details that you need to really think it through around infrastructure. How do we make sure that we're covering all the challenges of this diverse market while we're getting work done and advancing the ball?
What Jeremy's just said there, Mike, that crucial thing about the relationship with regulators, how important is that to really make strides forward on the sustainable workflows?
It's very important. We're here in the state of California, and in many cases, California has, for better or for worse, led some of those initiatives, for example, with the Tier 4 and Tier 5 emission standards, and the California Air Resources Board. And so Topcon's been engaged in elements of those conversations, both as a member of the Association of Equipment Manufacturers, as well as with the Ag Electronics Foundation, and really working to help set elements of the standards. One of the biggest things when it comes to interfacing with the regulators is providing information, right? One of the biggest challenges you have is that you don't know what you don't know. And a lot of this stuff can become very technical. And so one of the things that we really work on is transparency, and working on elements of transparency to be able to share information, as well as exactly like Jeremy had talked about, as an industry, each one of us has a voice, but together that choir can really sing and can really make some music if we're coordinated, right? And so that means that we all have to be singing from the same music, as well as coordinated in our approach. But once we get some of those basics established, that really helps. That helps us. I don't want to use the word lead, but I'll use the word influence and provide information to so many of the regulators and other stakeholders that begin to frame into the context of where we are as a company.
Jeremy, if I could perhaps move on to crucial thing about trying to minimize the amount of transportation carbon produced by the construction industry and various transportation and production processes. How can customers go about doing that? How can you help them minimize that transport cost?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we work with OEMs, right? We don't deal direct, so we work through OEMs who are either trying to move earth or transport goods, depending on the market. And that's true for both on and off highway. So we're really making sure we're partnering with them as we go through this. As we're heading towards zero, it's going to take a lot of steps. We've talked, I think, in the past even around intermediate steps are possible that are going to make like a big difference, like now. Mm-hmm. All while we're focusing on that long-term realistic approach on how we're going to get from A to B. Current engine systems are so much cleaner than stuff that's been out there a decade ago. I think we've used an example in some of our communications comparing the current spec US to a tier 1 machine. It's something like 25-1 from an emissions perspective. A bit extreme because there's not a whole lot of tier 1 out there, but there probably is still a whole lot of tier 3 equipment out there. I think, beyond just the engine system, tailpipe out, another big focus for us is really this integrated powertrain mindset. The more we can get integrated, and that doesn't necessarily have to mean hardware. That could be electronics, features, just general collaboration with customers and other powertrain producers. You can get a lot more efficiency, even a lot more productivity. If you look at what we've been doing on the Cummins side to head toward that, you could probably look no further than our Meritor acquisition a couple of years ago.
Big one.
Really, really trying to expand from just an engine and an after treatment to other pieces. The more of those pieces you put together, the more optimized you can get the system. And I would say that Cummins Meritor portfolio on our side, it's going to serve customers globally, does serve customers globally. And that doesn't really matter, right? It could be combustion-based powertrain. It could be electrified powertrains. We're really trying to spread that investment around and cover many different scenarios depending on the use case.
So there's a lot of choice, a lot of variation. Mike, for you, similar for Topcon in terms of reducing customers' transport costs, how Topcon can help on that sustainability aspect? For
us, I would say our business is fundamentally a little bit different than Jeremy's. And so in that respect, when customers begin to head down the sustainability journey, one of the first things you begin to do is look at your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. And for people who construct buildings, surfaces, move dirt, or grow crops, that has to do with a whole lot about what you burn or as well as where you start with inputs. And so that can be, for example, the difference between hot mix asphalt and warm mix asphalt, right? And in many cases, it starts with elements of the inputs because that's really the low-hanging fruit, right? It's what's the carbon footprint of those materials. And so in many cases, the Topcon sensors and technology have been used to create those digital data layers. So whether that's understanding vehicle tracking of what you moved and didn't move, or showing how you moved less, showing how you did the job, right? It's that proof of placement and those kinds of things. And like in the hot mix, warm mix example, right? As more and more people go to warm mix on the front end, that really amplifies the need for things like intelligent compaction and smoothness standards and things like that on the back end to make sure that you really are getting the longevity and those scope 3 emissions really out of the life of that structure. And so we really work with clients to understand elements of how the digital data layers can be captured within the workflow. And then those digital data layers serve as proof of practice for what they're doing.
Jeremy, in terms of making use of the best possible use of renewable energy in manufacturing, waste management techniques, really sort of capturing gains on sustainability gains. From a Cummins perspective on renewable energy in manufacturing, how do you go about, obviously, as a business doing that and also helping your customers capture some of those gains?
Yeah, so somebody, wasn't me, somebody who's a lot better with words than me, I think it said the greenest energy is the one you don't use, right? So I think from an engine system or a manufacturing facility, the goal is to make it more effective, use less. Then it's about increasing efficiency. And once you've kind of got that efficiency optimized, you can focus on how do you pivot over to making sure that that energy is coming from a renewable source. So for Cummins, we obviously have very specific business and sustainability targets for the manufacturing sites. In 2023, the company invested a little over $40 million on energy waste and water reduction projects. So when you think about manufacturing facilities, a lot of the power is going to come from solar. So we've actually continued to expand solar capability at the sites. We're up to, I believe, 66 locations have some form of solar arrays on site for power generation. Where we can't do that, we actually look for other ways to make a difference. In northern Indiana, there is a wind farm called Meadow Lake Wind Farm. Cummins, I believe, since 2017, has worked as part of a virtual power purchase agreement to make sure that we're helping to expand that and offset the energy that we use in other facilities. So there's a lot of different ways you can go about it. I think clearly 2030, the goals we have for the facilities, and we do have several, it's going to require action across the company. We publish a sustainability report, I believe, every year. I think the key part for corporations is coming up with goals that are based on science, articulating what those are, and really just focusing on execution. Like, it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to actually kind of put the proof down and put the work in. And I would say that's what we're striving to do.
That's right. As in everything, the proof's in there you're doing, isn't it? And from your point of view, Mike, as well, on the renewable energy and how Topcon is sort of working with that, embracing that on the manufacturing and also helping customers. You explained a bit about how Topcon goes about doing that.
Sure thing. So similar to Cummins, in this year, we've for many years have published an integrated report that includes sustainability metrics. This year, our report included Scope 1 and Scope 2 from all of our manufacturing facilities, as well as Scope 3 on the input side from our Japanese manufacturing facilities. And we're expanding that to include all 45, if not all 81 of our total Topcon locations. And so that's, but really when you begin to look into it, one of the first things you begin to understand is where are you? And so for us, it was a surprise, but also a pleasant surprise in the fact that we were about 4% last year. About 4% of our electricity came from renewable sources. We've added solar at a number of facilities. When you begin to look at our Scope 1 and Scope 2, that number actually, our inputs that come from renewable sources increases to about 7%, because in many cases, for example, like with our facilities in the Netherlands, those are all 100% powered by wind, which is nice. our facility, which includes like our facility in our Satel facility up in Finland, those are again through local initiatives 100% renewable. And so that facility, it's not just it's actually more it's actually more wind, as well as hydroelectric, as well as even the heat of the earth, and then heating that comes from the sanitation area, right? So they're taking methane and harvesting that off for the heat. And so that was a pleasant surprise, is once you begin to look into it, you can begin to find that we're increasingly more and more, again, depends on where your facility is, but certainly beginning to find those. And so we're finding more and more of those proof points as we continue down our sustainable journey, and then be able to reflect those. And so like we were talking about a little bit earlier, really working with clients to understand, once you begin to understand where your scope 1 and scope 2 is, it helps you do a better job to be able to help your clients understand how that fits into their perspective and where they are on the sustainability journey. And so we've found that both helpful as well as educational.
So in terms of some other new developments, technologies, software solutions, products that Cummins is working on in the sustainability area, you touched on a bit on Meritor, you've got Accelera, there's a lot going on there. Perhaps if you can go into a little bit more detail on some of the things Cummins is working on the sustainability area.
Yeah, it's a long list.
It's a long list, yeah.
Obviously, we continue record levels of investment in combustion technology. Like, I would probably be doing a disservice if I didn't mention that. We believe wholeheartedly that technology has a long runway still, on highway and off highway, much more so in off highway, I would say. If you look at off highway historically, we have always benefited from the activity in the on highway space, both from a product learning as well as a technology perspective. As the on-highway markets continue to evolve and bring new platforms or bring new requirements that drive new platforms, it actually opens up a lot of opportunity for companies like Cummins to bring new things into the off-highway world that are going to, even if they're still combustion engines at the same emissions, they're going to be able to get the jobs done more efficiently than their counterparts or predecessor.
Yeah.
We just launched an X15 for Stage 5 and Tier 4 markets at Intermat last year. That's going to be coming to production, I believe, fourth quarter 2026, first quarter 27. Excited about that. If you look, again, at what's going on highway, there's clearly a 2027 round of emissions coming. We're looking at that product, that technology, and already reading ahead to 2030 timeframe emissions for off-highway. Planning work has already started on that. We're also not going to stop at engine systems. So again, it's great to have an engine and an after treatment that meet emissions and do the job. If you think powertrain, think a little bit more broadly. Hybrid activity, I would say, is on the rise. We have, a lot of, I'm going to say, projects that are going on right now, but there's also a lot of applications you could go out and buy today. You don't have to look too hard to find them. So there's definitely options that are starting to emerge in the market. Those don't necessarily show up from a Cummins perspective on a system out. They probably would show up from an end user perspective on fuel consumed, that kind of thing. In general, for us, like, it all really starts with, you got to have an engine system that people want. Once you get that, you start thinking beyond that, and you're like, okay, what control feature sets or other things can we integrate and make that equipment more efficient, more productive, more enjoyable to operate. There are things out there that are not necessarily new, and I know we've talked about before, but even just digital connectivity. I'm sure my co-panelist here would confirm it, but data is power. The more data we've got,
sure, yeah,
the more intelligent of a decision we can make. And from our perspective, the better we're able to integrate, because we can really get insights on how are people using the equipment and where can we really make an impact.
Sure. And I just wanted to perhaps touch on hydrogen as well. I know this is something Cummins is looking at, that this is on your sustainability path. Hydrogen is very much part of the mix.
It is, and both from a generation. So we've talked about electrolyzer business and our Accelera division. Fuel cells, although farther out for a lot of markets, work continues on those, and probably more near term, We've launched what we call the Helm platform, which is really a base engine system. You can swap some parts out on it, key parts, and burn different fuels in them. So hydrogen is a combustion engine solution, something probably a little bit more near term for some of the markets. But yeah, hydrogen absolutely is a big part of the plan moving forward.
Great stuff. And from your perspective, Mike, and Topcon, in terms of some of the new technologies, development solutions that really help on the sustainability side of your customers, what's Topcon's offering new product-wise and technology? You could talk a little bit about that.
Sure thing. And so just like Jeremy had talked about, right, it starts off with data from the machine, being able to use basic systems like telematics and those kinds of things to begin to get data off the machine as well as feed data to the machine. But certainly once you begin to get the data off, those data layers off the machine, and that data begins to serve as proof of practice, right? It begins to come into what software system are you working with. And so on the Topcon side, whether that's for civil engineering, it's things like our ClearEdge 3D. On the construction side, it's things like our Aptix platform. And then on the agricultural side, it's things like our TAP platform. But being able to take those data layers in from the machine, begin to have a platform where you can visualize and leverage that data as proof of practice that you truly did some version of a best practice, and the fact that I used less, and the fact that I only used what I needed, and those kinds of things, and then begin to be able to share that data or relate it to your stakeholders, or use it in a streamline for your governmental reporting processes and things like that. And so those are the kinds of things that we're working on here at Topcon, is elements of getting the data layers from the machine to the software platforms, and then really the interoperability and the sharing ability within those software platforms as a system of record for proof of practice.
Are there particular products you could quote saying that are doing that now, or are they coming in the near future?
Yeah, so for us, the three that we have in the markets we serve are certainly it's ClearEdge 3D on the civil engineering side for things like being able to measure using data from the instruments to understand how I used, for example, concrete versus green concrete, and how that reduced my carbon footprint. In construction and dirt work, it would be things like our Aptix products, so that then we're actually tracking how we moved less dirt, burned less fuel, and are on target. And then in the agricultural platform, in the agricultural space, it would be our TAP platform, and being able to prove that, for example, the fertilizer, when I have a choice between two different, whether it's formulated fertilizers or organic fertilizers, how I use the lower carbon footprint organic fertilizer, and then how that, as a best management practice, can be reflected into the carbon footprint of the eventual output of that crop.
Jeremy, in terms of sort of your optimism going forward, a carbon neutral construction industry and off-highway equipment industry tapping into that, how optimistic are you that we will get there? Realistically, what is the sort of time frame? Are we going to hit the 2030? Are we going to hit 2050? What's your sort of sense of optimism of how we're going to reach these targets?
I would say long-term optimistic, but without doubt a time frame qualifier put around that. Off-highway, again, I think from our perspective, combustion engine runway is a long one. Definitely more so when you get outside of markets like the U.S. and Europe. So we tend to focus on those a lot. What we don't always talk about, you still got markets like Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, going to be a lot longer tail there. So if you're asking me to give a date, hard to do, right? And it's going to vary by which plot of land you're on. I think in our world, in a lot of cases, you're doing construction because the area needs to be developed. So from an infrastructure perspective, chances are it's not there where you need the power. Add to that, the fuel's got to be brought to the equipment. It's not like a truck where it pulls into the shop or it pulls into the station. Power density on this equipment, very, very high. And so we can continue to stress pragmatism and however we go about it. I think from our perspective, the best thing we can do is just continue to invest. We're going to make solutions available, and we're going to basically continue that effort to expand more into a powertrain supplier and be able to, drive further reductions. As far as 2030, 2040, 2050, that's hard to say. I would say U.S. and Europe markets, probably no problem, or some challenges, but we've all got a common mission. Outside of that, where a lot of the construction happens in the world, it's going to take probably a little bit longer.
But crucially, as part of that, it's helping contractors when they're bidding for work. If they say, for instance, I've got a Cummins powertrain, it's low emissions, it's this. That's a big factor in driving this agenda forward, is it not? When they're going to bid for work, they can get work with companies like yourselves. You can help them with that.
Yeah, I think how it shows up in bids is interesting, or job bids, those type of things. I think in a job bid, you could probably spec out a emissions level of the equipment. I think that's an easy first step. I think if somebody, fast forward a few years, wanted to go as far as to spec out, it had to be a hybrid. It's probably okay in some cases. My guess is you limit what OEMs or what contractors are going to be able to do that job. In some cases, there may or may not be a solution there at that time. Flexibility's got to be a part of it. As you think farther down the line, again, we're all working toward a zero status. So, yeah, eventually BEV and fuel cells, those kind of things are going to come. But it's really just got to be phased in, and what you're asking for at any given time needs to be matched with what the market has to offer at any given time.
Sure. And from your perspective, Mike and Topcon, what's your sort of optimism, the company's optimism that the construction industry will hit their targets on net zero, and obviously hit your own targets, and how Topcon can help customers bid for work by offering sustainable solutions? What's your thoughts on that?
In the long term, we're very bullish. We absolutely believe in the future of where this is headed, and we're very optimistic in that respect. The second thing is we certainly realize that different parts of the world move at different paces, and that in many cases, this is one of the things that the developing world, in some cases, might even be adopting or moving faster than the developed world, in the fact that they have fewer standards and that they can jump straight to the newest, latest, and greatest technology, and they don't have handcuffs of a previous workflow or those kinds of things. And so certainly we see that.
Sorry, Mike, I was going to say, are there countries specifically you could quote where you're seeing that sort of thing happen?
I don't have an example right offhand, in the fact that we can, certainly you see, for example, where we see it is in Japan. They're very, very climate sensitive. In places like Europe, and specifically Northern Europe, like we've seen with a project in Norway, right, that we started working on in 2017 to 2020, and really being able to provide those proof points. And so that it then comes down to elements of being able to use those data layers, and being able to use those data layers as proof of practice as they begin to frame into that context. And so for us, the biggest thing is the pace of adoption moves at the speed in which incentives are provided, because sustainability starts with profitability. And so really you have to have elements, and in many cases, sustainability also represents a cost reduction. And so being able to show elements of those best management practices, so that then you can serve as proof of practice that you are both reducing cost as well as improving, whether that's social sustainability from the social side, and worker safety from the environmental side, and reducing your footprint, or either from the governance side, so that then you show how your process is beginning to fit into that. And so being able to use those digital data layers as proof of practice towards those objectives that are being driven with incentives by the various stakeholders absolutely is where we see it. And in that respect, we're very positive on that.
And that's obviously meeting regulations, helping customers meet the regulations, and get those contracts. As I say, in the bidding for contracts, you're helping them do that by showing them that how sustainable your technology is, and the same with Jeremy.
That's correct. Being able to use those data layers as proof of practice, whether that's what your emissions are specific to your engine or your powertrain, or the distance traveled, or what you're moving, right? And then being able to really show that you are doing the right kinds of things, and that you're using what are understood as best industry management practices that truly represent the best and most innovative aspects of how technology is being used in the industry.
Well, this is open to both of you, really. Is there anything you think we've been talking for half an hour now? We've gone over a lot of ground. Is there anything that we haven't covered on the sustainable workflow, sustainability agenda that you particularly want to convey that listeners, watchers of this broadcast will really want to know? Is there anything in particular you'd like to add, perhaps?
Yeah, I think, jumping in here, I think from our perspective as well as the industry, like, at least for off-highway, on-highway, I think is similar. There's not going to be one solution as we head down this path, right? We're going to have to find our avenues and opportunities to find scale and build it, and that's going to dictate a whole lot about how we're able to execute. We went and looked at some of the quotes from our CEO. I'm not going to give them to you verbatim. I will not put them as well as she did, but I think some of the key points out of that, customers need options, and Cummins is here to provide it. Even within a given application name, you've got a wide spread of size. Even within a common size, you've got a wide spread of use cases. So there is not going to be probably even like one solution for a 20-ton excavator. You're going to see multiples, and all of them are probably going to make sense. From the path to zero, I think the big part of it is just going to take commitment to decarbonize, and a big part of that commitment is going to be making choice and flexibility for OEMs, who are going to in turn make that flexibility available to end users who are actually doing the work. And I thought the comment just a minute ago was actually a good one. Like, profitability is a big part of it. It's easy to have nice solutions that are very advanced. If the person who's buying that equipment to make a living can't make a living with it, we have a problem. So I think we just all have to bear that in mind pretty heavily as we carry on down the line.
I think that's a very crucial point right across the industry, not just on sustainability, on everything. The bottom line has to benefit as well as everything else. That's the real world, isn't it? That's business. From your perspective, Mike, and Topcon, is there anything you think that you really want to sort of add in our conversation that we haven't covered already? Or perhaps you can sort of sum up the sort of famous elevator pitch. Where is Topcon at? Where's it on a sustainability, and where's it going?
Sure thing. And so when I begin to reflect on our time together and our conversation, I guess we've talked a lot about environmentalism and elements of that. To me, one of the biggest pieces is the social sustainability. It's the idea of quality work. It's the idea of whether that's now safer, whether that's higher value, whether that's reducing operator fatigue, whether that's increasing wages. It's a number of those kind of pieces of that puzzle. And then being able to have the proof points around that social sustainability. I think that really the second thing is it's elements of the work that matters, right? And really bringing elements of that in. And so for us, sustainability and digitization are intimately linked, and it's the elements of those digital data layers and how they begin to fit into a workflow and how they begin to be used as proof of practice that you are doing the right things for not just profitable, but also for the people and for the planet. And when you're beginning to be able to validate elements of that triple win, right? Well, it's validating that triple win and then aligning it where there are incentives to deliver that kind of value. And so our tools and technologies are used as pieces that help customers validate and tell that story about what they're doing and how they're doing it. And so in that respect, that's where I think we fit into the puzzle.
Brilliant. And from your perspective, Jeremy and Cummins, if I was to say an elevator pitch of what sustainability means to Cummins, how would you sort of sum that up?
Yeah, I mean, just to say it higher, we've been at this for a long time. I think we're 105 years old now. We would like to be at it for a long time still into the future. So we are committed to delivering power solutions, not just one, but a diverse portfolio of them. And that is core to our Destination Zero strategy, and that flexibility, again, how we get from A to B. Our product range, again, it's going to span core engine business. So what we've done well for a long, long time, it goes all the way to the other end to our Accelera business, where we have our zero emissions technologies. You've got the components and other business units in between. A whole lot of opportunity and a whole lot of optionality there for the customers. And again, with that push further and further into the powertrain strategy or powertrain of the equipment, our Destination Zero approach, it's going to meet the diverse needs of the market. We're going to bring real world greenhouse gas reductions independent of how fast ZEV adoption comes in. There are things we can do and will do. And we continue to make significant investments. I think tagline numbers, $1.4 billion in R&D in 2023, $250 million of that I think was Europe alone. And again, don't really see that slowing down for quite a while. So we're committed, we're engaged, and we're going to be here all the way through the journey.
Maybe just to finish with yourself, Mike, I don't know if you could sum up, if I was to say 3 words that you could sum up Topcon sustainability approach. You've covered some of it before, but are there particular sort of words that really capture how Topcon is approaching this?
I guess from my perspective, it's really around profit. You're right. Sustainability is really about profit, people, and then planet, right? And being able to really drive that. And so that's that for us. It's the work that matters, and it matters in the context of both profit, people, and planet.
Perfect. Thank you very much, gentlemen. That was absolutely great. So concludes our Sustainability Workflows Roundtable. Stay tuned for more from Global Highways. Thank you.